Masechet Makkot Daf Gimel. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Ed Zomem Meshalem Lefi Chalko. We begin with a statement by Rav that Ed Zomem pays his share. Seems like a simple statement, but we're going to go through a few different ways of interpreting it. So, my Meshalem Lefi Chalko. What exactly does this mean that the Ed Zomem pays only his share? Ilem Adahay Meshalem Palga Vahay Meshalem Palga Tanena Meshaleshin B'Mamon Ve'en Meshaleshin Makkot. If it means, it was a basic, straightforward meaning, is that each witness pays half. So let's say there's two witnesses and they come and say, this particular defendant, he owes that guy $100. And then they're found to be Adim Zomemin. So they get a reciprocal punishment, right? They get the same punishment that they tried to make the defendant suffer. So they tried to make the defendant pay 100. We don't say that each witness has to pay 100 for a total of 200. We don't need 200. Rather, together, they have to come up with 100. So they have to pay 50 each. If there were 10 witnesses, then they'd pay $10 each, so that they all together make up the full amount. So if that's what Rav meant to say, well, that can't be, because there's an explicit Mishnah that we're going to see later in the coming up on Daf He that says we divide. The word Mishaleshin literally comes from 3, to divide into 3. That would be assuming that there are 3 witnesses. Okay, if there are 3, but if it was 2 witnesses, it would be half. So the point is that you divide money, but not Makkot. If the witnesses came, let's say 2 witnesses came, and they said, well, this guy, we saw him eat pork, he deserves lashes. And let's say they're all very healthy and they can handle 39 lashes. So they were going to give 39 lashes. We don't, and they're found to be Adim Zoamin. We don't divide the lashes and say, all right, this witness gets 20 and this witness gets 20. No, both witnesses get 39 lashes. Same thing for capital punishment. Both witnesses get capital punishment. You can't give half capital punishment. But when it comes to money, we do divide it. So the Mishnah already said that each one will pay 50. Rav doesn't need to come and repeat the same law. It's already in the Mishnah. So Rav must have meant something else. Maybe Rav means that, let's say 2 witnesses come and they say this guy owes $100, and then a second set of witnesses comes and testifies about only one of the original witnesses and said this one guy could not have seen that loan, whatever happened on that date, because he was with us in Chicago. So only one of the witnesses became an Ed Zomem and not the other. Then Rav is teaching that one witness doesn't have to pay the entire $100, but only 50. Is that what Rav is teaching? That also can't be, because Umi Mishalem, would he even pay? We have a Braita that teaches that one witness, that an Ed Zomem, does not pay unless both of the witnesses are found to be Edim Zomemin. So in that case, actually, he wouldn't pay anything. So that can't be what Rav is talking about. Amarav be'omer edut sheker ha'adati. Rav says, I know. This is what Rav meant to teach when he said that. It's when one witness comes and admits, listen, I was lying. I wasn't even in town on that day. I was elsewhere. He basically makes himself an Ed Zomem. So maybe that's what it's talking about when he makes himself an Ed Zomem. And so then he has to pay 50 and not 100. But the Gemara rejects that answer also. Kol kimineh kevan shehigid shub eno chozer magid. Would we even believe his admission? We have a rule that once a witness testifies, he cannot reverse his testimony. We suspect that, maybe it happens sometimes. Witnesses come, they say, yeah, we saw this guy and he committed murder. He committed theft. And after they testify, like, oh no, now they're going to punish this guy based on my testimony. I don't want this on my head, right? They feel some kind of pressure. Or they say, no, forget it. I was lying. They take it back. No, if you said it, and probably it's true, and we don't accept admission from a witness to retract his testimony. And therefore, we would not believe him. And therefore, that one witness would not have to pay. So that can't be what Rav meant. Ella, let's try again. Be'omer ha'adnu v'huzamnu b'bedin peloni. Oh, maybe it's a case where there were 2 witnesses. They said this guy owes $100. They were found to be Adim Zomemin. They didn't pay it. They went to another city. And in the second city, both of them came to a Bet Din who didn't know them and said, listen, we were tried in the Bet Din over there, and they found that we were Adim Zomemin, and we want to admit it. So they're not retracting their testimony in the original one, a bet din, where they would not be believed, but rather they are admitting that they are edim zomim, and they were found to be edim zomim by a second set of witnesses. But they got away without paying. They ran away. And now they're admitting it in the second court. And then that's what Rav says, that they would have to pay each their share 50 and 50. Is that true? Well, let's see. Keman, well, this could be a good explanation of Rav if he didn't follow Rabbi Akiva. But it can't be according to Rabbi Akiva, and that's a problem because halacha follows Rabbi Akiva. It doesn't make sense that Rav would give a law against Rabbi Akiva. Now, why can't it be like Rabbi Akiva? Because he said in the Braita that we saw in the previous daf, that a person, an Ed Zomem, does not pay based on his own admission. This is because, as we explained, it's a fine. And one does not pay a fine if one admits to it. You only pay a fine if someone else comes and proves that you owe that fine. And therefore, this explanation of Rav would not work with Rabbi Akiva, and therefore it's not likely that that is what Rav meant. He wouldn't say something against Rabbi Akiva. Ela be'omer, he'adnu ve'huzamnu bebetin peloni ve'huyavnu mamon. Okay, similar to the previous case, but we're adding one more thing to their admission. Two witnesses, they testify in a court. This guy owes $100. Edim Zohamim come and say they're lying. And the court says, okay, you're lying. And then the court issues a document that says you have to pay $100. So the court already issued a liability. In other words, the court, by issuing that liability, transfers that which was a fine into something payable. It's a debt. They have to pay it. So because they already transfer into a debt, and then these witnesses run away, and they go to a different city, and they come to the court, and they make an admission. Listen, we were witnesses. We were found to be edim zomamin. And the court in that place already gave us a writ that we have to pay. So it's not a fine anymore. Rather, it's a debt. And even Rabbi Akiva would agree in that case that they have to pay. So in that case, let's say only one of them came and said, listen, I have to pay this. Then he has to pay his share and not both. Why would Rav need to teach this? I might have thought that since, let's say one witness comes and says, yeah, I have to pay, he does not have the power to make the other guy also pay unless the other guy admits as well. Right? One guy is not going to be he's believed regarding himself to say, listen, I owe a debt. Someone's not believed to say, I retract my testimony. They also, if they say I have to pay a fine, then they don't have to pay a fine. But someone says, I owe you money, so we believe him. That a person can make himself liable to pay money as a debt. So one person comes, he says, I owe money because of that case. We believe him for himself, but we're not going to believe him for the other guy. So I might have thought that since he's not believed for the other guy, that he also doesn't have to pay. And that's why Rav came and taught us this law, that even though he wouldn't believe regarding the other guy, he does have to pay his share of 50. And the other guy, if he admits, then he would also have to pay only his share of 50. And now for the next Mishnah, Me'idin anu et ish peloni shegeresh et ishto velo natan la ketubata. V'halo ben hayom ben lemachar sofo liten la ketubata. So two witnesses come and say, we testify that this man divorced his wife and he did not pay her ketubah. So let's say in the ketubah document, here's a beautiful ketubah document from Venice in the 18th century. So in the ketubah document, let's say, it says that the man says, I'm going to pay you the 200 zuz for the marriage plus 800, 1,000 zuz. Let's just say that he's going to pay. Now, the man has to pay as any time if there's divorce, or if he dies first, then his estate will have to pay her. If she dies first, and they're married their whole lives, and she dies first, then there is no ketubah payment. The husband keeps the money. Okay, so the witnesses come and say, he divorced his wife and he didn't pay a ketubah, he owes $1,000. And it turns out that those witnesses are edim zomemin. So now they have to pay that which they were trying to make the husband pay. So you might think for at first glance that would be $1,000. However, it's not quite right, because whether today or later on, at some point, the husband will probably have to pay the ketubah. So these witnesses were just trying to make the husband pay earlier than he might have needed to. So let's say let's say you believe the witnesses and they made him pay $1,000. That value was not a full $1,000 because he would have had to pay. Let's say in the end they were going to get divorced in 10 years. So he would have paid the $1,000 in 10 years from now. Instead, he only paid it. He paid it now instead of 10 years from now. So that's just a difference in time, but that is not worth a whole $1,000. So the witnesses were not going to make him lose out a whole $1,000. They were going to make him lose out, in fact, less than that. So how much does he have to pay? It's as follows: Omdim, kama adam roseh liten b'ktubata shel zo, she'im nit'al mena o nitgadesha, ve'im meta yirashena ba'ala. We make an assessment. How much would a person pay basically to buy the rights of the ketubah? A person could go to the woman. We're going to see in a second there's two ways to evaluate this, but let's take the simple way. A person could go to a wife. A wife is married, whatever, they're happily or not so happily married, whatever, or he's a little sick or she's a little sick, there's all kinds of factors. A person can go to the wife and says, okay, how much is in the ketubah that will be given to you? She says $1,000. He says, okay, well, when are you going to get that money? She says, I don't know, maybe if we get divorced in one day, maybe in 10 years, maybe when my husband dies in 20 years, who knows when it's going to be, then I'll get the $1,000. But let's say she wants some cash right now. She wants to go buy something herself. So she might make a deal with the person and say, listen, I will sell to you my future right for the ketubah for a discount. Maybe the discount would be for $400. And so the person buying it might be willing to make that bet. Listen, I'll give you $400 cash right now for the right that, who knows, in a few years, I think your marriage is not so good, or I think your husband seems not so well. You know what? I'm willing to make that bet. I'll give you $400 now, so that I will be able to get $1,000 in a little while, or a long while, or whenever it is, or maybe not at all. It is a big risk. Because if the woman dies first, then there is no ketubah payment. He gave her $400 and he lost it. Okay, but there is some number that one would be willing to pay. So we say, how much would a person be willing to pay for the ketubah of this person, that if she would be widowed or divorced, then she would get that money. Although if she died first, then the husband would inherit from her and take everything and he would receive nothing. There's a number. That's the amount that you would need to assess before deciding how much the witness would have to pay. In fact, it would be actually 1,000 minus 400. Because the amount that he would have made him pay right now instead of later, that is worth 400 now. So that actually is the same. So that he would be willing to, let's say, give 400. A husband might be willing, if that's the market rate, he'd be willing to say, hey, listen, I'll give you 400 now, and that's it. I'm not going to pay you a ketubah ever again. So the 400 is actually a value that it makes sense to pay right now. The difference that he would have paid now is the difference between 1,000 and 400. That's what the false witnesses are making him pay over and above what he would have had to pay anyway. So they have to pay 600 and not the full 1,000. That's what the Mishnah is teaching. Okay, Kesad Shamin. And now the Gemara says, how do we assess this? I mentioned the way that we assess it is Ba'isha, which is going to be a second opinion. But there's another way to assess it. Amar Chista Ba'al. We assess the value of the ketubah for the husband, because for the husband it's actually a different calculation. If someone would go to the husband and say, I want to buy all of the rights, all of your interest in the ketubah. That's actually more, because the husband, he sets aside a piece of land that will be used to pay the ketubah. And the ketubah says the ketubah payment has a lien on this piece of land, and so that she can always collect from that land. Now, while they are married, that land is going to produce fruits, and the husband keeps it. So that's one thing. Furthermore, any land that she brings into the marriage, during the marriage, the husband also gets to keep the produce. So if someone comes to the husband and says, I'm willing to pay you cash now, for your interest in the ketubah, then that buyer will get all the rights to the produce of the land that's mortgaged for the ketubah and land that she owned that the husband is using. All that land, if the husband dies or they get divorced, then that land will go to the wife, and then that buyer will lose it out, and so he might be paying a significant amount of money, and then not get anything back from it if they get divorced the next day. But that's worth more to him because he, in the meantime, until they get divorced or he dies, that buyer will be able to get the produce. So therefore, that is worth a higher amount than if the interest of the wife in it, where in the meantime you're just paying you $400 now, but they're not getting anything from it until something happens. So anyway, Rav Chisda says we make the assessment based on the husband's interest in the ketubah, which will include the right to use the produce now. So there'll be a higher amount, and so we take that and subtract that amount. Whereas Rav Natan bar Oshaya Omer Ba'isha, we use the assessment of the wife's interest in the ketubah. We assess how much that would be, and then the edim zomin have to pay the difference of that amount, because that's actually a fair amount that anybody would pay her now for the future right. So we pay the difference between that and what they made. They were going to make it pay 1,000. But really, the fair amount right now would have been 400, so he has to pay the difference of 600. For if it was the Baal, then it might be someone might pay 800 now, and so they would only have to pay the difference of 200. So we have Makkot, Amar Papa Beisha uBichtubataha. Rav Papa says the final halacha should follow Rav Natan bar Oshaya, meaning we do the assessment of the wife, and he's clarifying it's only the monetary value of the $1,000. That's all that we are going to use to subtract. There'll be 1,000 minus the 400. Ketubata, meaning the monetary amount that it says in the ketubah. We're not including the other properties that she had brought in that she would get back, either the land itself or the value of that land. That we're not including because most of the time the witness wouldn't know about it. So when witness comes and says, hey, I testify he divorced her and didn't pay ketubah, what the witness is focusing on and only knows about is the monetary amount, the 200 zuz, plus there might be an added amount that the husband says I'm going to give. That's what they were making the guy pay. That witness probably didn't even know about the other things. If he did know about it, and that was his intention, testifying falsely to get that money out also, then it could be that the witnesses would have to pay. But Rav Papa is giving a standard case where the witnesses don't even know about that stuff. Next Mishnah, Me'idin anu be'ish peloni. שהוא חייב לחברו 1,000 זוז על מנת ליתנה לו מכאן ועד 30 יום. והוא אומר מכאן ועד 10 שנים. Two witnesses come and they say, this person is a borrower. He owes the lender 1,000 zuz, and the terms of the loan were 30 days. Right? He says, I'm going to borrow, he has to pay back in 30 days. We testify, we were there, we just saw this happen, and he has to pay in 1,000 zuz in 30 days. Now the borrower says, I did in fact borrow 1,000 zuz. I totally agree with that. But the terms are not what you said. The terms were 10 years. I have 10 years from now to pay it back. Well, that's a big difference. So now those witnesses are found to be edim zomemin. So how much do they have to pay? What's the reciprocal punishment? What did they try to do? Do they have to pay 1,000 zuz? Well, it shouldn't be 1,000. They don't have to pay a full 1,000 zuz because the borrower admitted that he owes 1,000 zuz. So he's going to have to pay eventually. So they shouldn't have to pay a full value of 1,000 zuz. It's not 1,000 versus 0. He was going to pay he's going to pay in 10 years, not instead of 30 days. So what does he pay? He's going to pay the time value of that money. Omdim kama adam roseh liten v'yu beyado 1,000 zuz ben notnan mikan va'ad 30 yom ben notnan mikan va'ad 10 shanim. We make an assessment. What would be a value to a person to have in his hands 1,000 zuz in 30 days versus 1,000 zuz in 10 years? Obviously, a person would much rather have 1,000 zuz in 30 days. How much would you pay for that? Well, if I knew you were going to give me 1,000 zuz in 30 days, I might pay you right now 990 zuz, right? I'll give you 990 now, and I'll get 1,000 later. This would be interest and whatever, but the point is the value of it. And if I say, hey, I'll give you 1,000 zuz in 10 years, how much would you pay now for that? Oh, and for 10 years, for that, I would only pay 100 zuz for right now. To get 1,000 in 10 years, I would pay much less. And so you take the difference between those amounts, 990 minus 100, and that's how much the witnesses have to pay. Because that's in fact what they were trying to make the defendant lose, that instead of paying in 10 years, he'd have to pay in 30 days if we believe the witnesses. So we'd make the difference between the time value of that money. אמר רב יהודה אמר שמואל, המלווה את חברו ל10 שנים, שבראית משמטתו. Shmuel says a law, we're going to see another version of this law in a minute that says the opposite. But in this version, Shmuel says, if I give you a loan that's payable in 10 years from now, now within those 10 years, for sure there's going to be a shivi'it automatically. There's going to be at least one shivi'it year that cancels loans. So that shivi'it will cancel the loan because the loan goes through a shivi'it cycle that cancels all loans, and this is a 10-year loan. So basically, a 10-year loan will never have to be paid. And even though right now it does the law of do not collect, you're not allowed to extract it. That's the law. It says in the 7th year, do not exact the money. Don't go and ask for the money from the borrower in that 10th year, and it's canceled. Now, even though it cannot be collected in that year because the lender can't come and collect it until the 10th year. And so even though during that 7th year, in the middle, lo yigos, not collecting it does not apply to that loan, but since in the end, in another few years, it will be a collectible loan, so we apply that already now, and Shavi'it cancels the loan. That is Shemuel's law. Now, this is relevant to us because Mativ Rav Kahana Omdim Kama Adam Roseh Liten Vehu 1,000 Zuz Biado Ben Liten Mikan Vad 30 Yom Ben Liten Mikan Vad 10 Shanim V'Yamat Shibit Misham Matto Kulehu Name Ba'e Shalom Eleh. Rav Kahana asks a question from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says we make an evaluation for these Edim Zomemin, and we ask what's assessed? How much would a person give to get 1,000 zuz in the 30 days versus how much he would pay to get 1,000 zuz in 10 years. So there's a time difference, but that assumes he's going to get the 1,000 zuz in 10 years. But if you say that Shavi'it cancels every 10-year loan, well then that way he's never going to get paid anything. So basically in this case of the Mishnah, where the guy said, listen, I did borrow 1,000 zuz, but I don't have to pay in 10 years. That means basically he never has to pay back. So this defendant was not going to have to pay anything at all. And by these false witnesses coming and saying it's a 30-day loan, they're making him pay 1,000. It's 1,000 versus nothing. And therefore, the Edim Zomin should have to pay a full $1,000 and not the time value difference, because the time value of a loan that's paid in 1,000 in 10 years is actually zero, right? That loan is worth zero because it's automatically going to be canceled. So the language of this Mishnah contradicts Shemuel's law. So we answer, Amarava, Hachava Iskinan ve'maveh mashkon moseh shtarotav lebetin ditnan. Hamaveh mashkon ve'moseh shtarotav lebetin and mashmitin. Rava says our Mishnah is talking about either a case of someone who lends money on the basis of a collateral, right? If I give you $1,000 and you give me your watch, and I'm holding on to the watch as collateral, then Shavi'it does not cancel it because we don't apply lo yigos. I don't have to go and collect the loan in 10 years because I could keep your watch. You're the one, if you want your watch back, you're the one that should come and pay me. So since this loan is not subject to collection, meaning I don't have to collect it, I'm happy to, I collected it already. I have the payment in the form of a watch. Oh, you want the watch back? Okay, you can give me 1,000 zuz if you want. So a loan like that does not get canceled under Shavi'it. And also, if a loan is given over to the court for collection, which is basically how the Piros Bowl works, so then if I say, listen, I'm giving, it's not my loan, I'm giving it to the court. The court, Shavi'it does not cancel things that are owed to the court. And so I transfer it to the court and say, you collect this for me. Then also Shavi'it does not cancel it. That's the case of the Mishnah that we're talking about. So Shmuel was talking about a regular loan that's not in the court and has no collateral. There, the Shavi'it year cancels it. So you can never have a 10-year loan. That's just plain like that. But our Mishnah was talking about a case where there was a mashkon or they gave it to Bet Din. As the Mishnah says in Masechet Shavi'it, someone who lends with collateral or transfers the loan documents to the Bet Din, they are not canceled. That's all one version. Now we're going to say everything that we just said in opposite land. Ika da'amre, amar Rav Yehuda amar Shmuel, hamavet chavero la'eser shanim, and shvi'it mishamatto, v'afagav da'ate lidei lo yigos, hashtamiha la'karinan be lo yigos. In this version, Shmuel says, someone who lends money for 10 years, shvi'it does not cancel it. And even though in 10 years, at the end of 10 years, then you'll have, it'll be collectible, and it'll come to a state where you'll have a problem of extracting it. But right now, during the 7th year that comes, it's not yet collectible. It's not due. So therefore, the prohibition not to exact the loan in the 7th year does not apply, does not cancel it because it's not collectible yet. So that's the basic principle, that if the loan, when the loan is due after Shvi'it, then Shvi'it does not cancel it. Only if it's due before Shvi'it, and then you didn't pay yet, then it's canceled. Okay, so according to this, Amar Rav Kahana, Afana nami tanena, omdim kama adam rose liten v'hiu 1,000 zuz biyado, ben liten mikan vad 30 yom, ben liten mikan vad 10 shanim, v'yamat Shvi'it mishamato, kuluhu name ba'u shalumele. Rav Kahana says, oh, Shmuel, I have a proof for your law from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah says we make an evaluation. How much did Adim Zomin have to pay? We make an evaluation. How much would a person give to get 1,000 zuz in 30 days versus to get 1,000 zuz in 10 years? Now, if you would say, not like Shemuel, this version of Shemuel, that the Shvi'it in the middle cancels the loan, then, in fact, Adim Zomin would have to pay all 1,000 because that was making the difference. If it was 10 years, the defendant was going to pay 0, and now they're making the defendant pay 1,000. So then the Adim Zomin should have to pay 1,000. But the Mishnah does not say that, and therefore there's a proof for Shemuel that a loan is not canceled if it comes due after the Shvi'it is finished. Amar Rava, hacham eskinan b'mava mashkon moseh shotav l'betin. Ditnan, hamava mashkon b'moseh shotav l'betin and mashmitin. Rava says, no, this Mishnah is not necessarily a proof because this Mishnah might be talking about a case where someone gives a loan with the collateral, or he transferred it to Bet Din, and the Mishnah taught that if you give a loan on collateral, or gives it to the Bet Din, then Shemitah does not cancel that loan. And maybe that's why in the Mishnah the loan is not canceled, but if you didn't do those things, then maybe Shemitah would cancel a loan that's for 10 years, and so this is not necessarily a proof for Shemuel. Ve'amar Rav Yehuda amar Shemuel, another law in the name of Shemuel, ha'omer l'chavero al menat shelo teshameteni shvi'it. Shvi'it mishametet. If someone says, here, I'm going to lend you $1,000 on condition that the shvi'it will not cancel the loan. So in that case, the shvi'it still cancels the loan. You can't make a condition that goes against a basic Torah law, right? And that seems to be the reason of Shemuel. Lema kasava Shemuel matnei ma shekatuv b'Torahu v'chol matnei ma shekatuv b'Torah tena'o batel. So let's assume that the reason for Shemuel's ruling is that he is making a condition against the law of the Torah. And anyone who makes a condition against a law of the Torah, the condition is void, null and void. And so the loan is a loan. And so here, I'm going to give you $1,000. Now, I need you to pay it back in 10 years on condition that the Shvi'it will not cancel it. Nevertheless, Shvi'it cancels it. Or let's say it's due before Shvi'it. And then it says it's going to do before Shvi'it. And even if you don't pay it, still, you have to, Shvi'it will not cancel it. Still, Shvi'it does cancel it. Now we ask, V'ha'itmar ha'omed l'chavero, amenat she'en lecha alai ona'a, Rav omer yesh lo alav ona'a, u'shmel alav en o alav ona'a. Wait a second. We have another machloket similar to this one. Someone says to someone else, let's say someone's selling a camera. The camera is worth $1,000. But the seller says, listen, I'm going to overcharge you, right? Because if you agree to it, instead of $1,000, I'm going to charge you $1,500 on condition that you don't have a claim of ona'ah against me. If you charge more than the sixth over the market price, and the market price here is $1,000, I'm charging you $1,500. But I'm telling you up front, I'm overcharging you on condition that there's no ona'ah. So is there ona'ah? Rav says that the buyer can still have a claim of ona'ah. He can come back and say, sorry, you overcharged me. This sale is null and void, and I have to give you your money back, even though you said on condition, because you can't make a condition against the Torah. And Shemuel says, and lo alav hona'ah, the condition stays in place, even though this is a condition against the Torah. But since you made a condition, the condition works, even though against the Torah. So this would contradict what the reasoning that we gave for Shemuel's law over here. So we answer, Ha'itmar Allah amarav anan. Ledidi mefarshele mine de Shmuel. Rav Anan says, Shmuel explained this to me. I'll tell you what he meant. Al menat she'en lecha alai ona'ah, en lo alav ona'ah. Al menat she'en bo ona'ah, harei yesh bo ona'ah. Shmuel's making a very fine distinction. If I sell you the camera and I say, listen, I'm overcharging you $1,500 instead of $1,000 on condition that you do not have a claim of ona'ah against me, then there is no claim of ona'ah. But if I say on condition that there is no ona'ah, then there is ona'ah. In other words, I can make a condition that you are not going to make a claim of ona'ah against me. You're going to waive your right to challenge the sale, and you're not gonna go back on the sale. That you can do. I'm doing it. I'm selling to this on condition that you waive your right to sue me. That you can do. However, I cannot say I'm telling you this on condition that there is no ona'ah, because this is the definition of ona'ah. I can't change the definition of a Torah law, right? This is a law. I can't say on condition that the Torah doesn't prohibit this. The Torah does prohibit it. So that, in that case, if I say it that there is no ona'ah, then the condition is null and void, and you can come and get your money back. But if I say on condition that you won't claim ona'ah, so that's a decision that you can agree to. Hachaname al menat shelo teshameteni ba'shvi'it en shvi'it mishamatto. Al menat shelo teshameteni shvi'it mishamatto. So we can make a similar distinction here. If I give you a loan and I say, on condition that you will not abrogate the loan during the Shvi'it year, then the Shvi'it year will not abrogate the loan. Because I'm not saying that the Shvi'it law doesn't apply. I'm saying on condition that you don't cancel the loan, but you will come and still pay it back. In that case, you still owe the money. However, if I don't say you, instead I say on condition that Shvi'it does not cancel the loan, that goes against the fundamental law of the Torah. And in that case, the Shvi'it will cancel the loan. So Shemuel's ruling that he said, that we started off with, when he says the Shvi'it cancels the loan no matter what, that was talking about a case where I used this formula. And indeed, you cannot make a stipulation against the Torah. However, if I would say not the Torah law is abrogated, but on condition that you do not consider it canceled, okay, then you can waive your right to have the loan canceled, and then the loan will not be canceled. Tana, Hamalvet Chabero Sitam, Eno Rashai Letovo Pachot Misheloshim Yom. A Braita teaches, if I give you a loan without telling you a due date of when you have to pay it back, I just leave it open-ended, here's $100, then I am not allowed to ask for it back within 30 days. I have to let you use it for at least 30 days, and I can't even ask for it back. That's the standard amount. Sabar Rabba Bar Hana Kamed Rav Lememar. Hanemi le b'milveh b'shtar. Dela avid ini ish tetarach techatab shetar basir metilatin yomin. Avama ve'al la. Rabba Bar Hana was thinking about this braita, and he proposed the following understanding to Rav. He was thinking to say, this baraita must only be talking about a loan that is written up in a document, because a person's not going to go bother to get the paper and the pen and the scribe and the witnesses and all that to give a loan that's less than 30 days. If it's a very short-term loan, I'm not going to bother with all that. And so that's why it's got to be, we assume it's at least 30 days. But if it's an oral loan, then we don't assume that. Maybe, you need a quick $100, you just have to pay someone, and then I'm going to expect to get it back in 2 days, in 3 days. So if it's an oral loan, then I can ask for it back within 30 days. That's how he was interpreting this baraita. However, Amar le Rav, Hachi Amar Habibi, Echad Amalve Bishtar, Vechad Amalve Al Peh. Rav says, not so. My beloved uncle, Rabbi Chia, said that this baraita applies both to a loan in a written document and an oral agreement to a loan. Tanyan Mehachi, there's a baraita that proves what Rav's interpretation was. Someone who lends money without giving a due date is not allowed to collect it within 30 days, and it makes no difference whether it's a documented loan or an oral loan. Amar le Shemuel le Rab Matana, la tetib akar'ech ad dim farshat la leha shema'ata. Shemuel told Rab Matana, please do not sit on your feet. Do not sit down, meaning like sit down on the floor, on your feet, until you explain to me this baraita. I'm eager to understand it, and I can't wait. Please explain it to me right now. Quotes this baraita that we just said. Again, why do the rabbis say that if I give you a loan, unspecified due date, then I cannot try to collect it before 30 days, whether it's written in writing or it's oral. Amale dichtib, kareba shenata sheba, shenata shemita. Mimashma shenemar kareba shenata sheba, and niodea shi shenat shemita. And so Rav Matana says, I'll bring you a proof, a source from a pasuk. The pasuk says that when the 7th year is coming close, then you have to make sure not to say, you know what, I'm not going to lend you money because the 7th year is coming close. But rather, you have to be generous and open your hand and still lend money. Now, this pasuk uses double language. The 7th year has come close, the year of Shemitah. Now, if you told me that the 7th year is coming close, don't I already know that that's the Shemitah year? Why the repetition in the pasuk? אלא מה תלמוד לומר שנת השמיטה, לומר לך, יש שמיטה אחרת שהיא כזו, ואיזו זו? המלווה את חברו סתם, שאינו רשאי לתבוע בפחות מ-30 יום. דאמר מור, 30 יום בשנה, חשוב שנה. And the answer is, why does it say שנת השמיטה? To teach you that there is another time period that is similar to the Shivi'it year. Just like in the Shivi'it year, you cannot collect a loan. You can't ask a person to pay it back. So too, there is another time period that also you cannot ask for someone to pay you the loan. And what is that? That is someone who gives a loan without specifying any due date, that he cannot collect it before 30 days. Now, why do you call this Shenat Shemitah? Why is it called a whole year? Because there is a source that says 30 days in a year is like a year. That law applies to Orlah. And in order to count Orlah, you're not allowed to use the tree at all for the first 3 years. In the 4th year, it's holy. And then in the 5th year, you can use it for yourself. But those 3 years don't have to be 3 full years, 365 days. But rather, if you plant a tree 30 days at least or more before Rosh Hashanah, then those 30 days are considered year number 1. So 30 days can be counted as a whole year. Therefore, this Shenat Shemitah is talking about a 30-day period. Any 30-day period, it has the same law as the Shenata Sheva, has the same law as Shemitah. And that is referring to, if I did specify a due date, then I could say anything I want. I could say, I need it back tomorrow or in 10 years. But if I don't specify a due date, then this law kicks in. If I'm giving you a loan, then you have a right to use it. I can't expect you. It's harassing you to come and say a few days later, come and give it to me, give me back the money. We're assuming that you want to be able to use it for some useful purpose, and that assumption is 30 days because 30 days is like a year. And so that's the source and reason for this baraita. And it's not because you wouldn't bother to write up a loan for 30 days or not. It applies to a written loan and an oral loan. It's just a basic understanding that if I give you a loan and I didn't specify, then I have no right and I should not collect it before 30 days. And finally, the last law for this daf, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. This time Rav Yehuda, instead of quoting Shmuel, is quoting Rav. Hapoteach bet hasavar b'Shabbat chayav hatat. This law has nothing to do with the laws before. It's only here as a tangent because it happens to be that Rav Yehuda quotes a tradition and then is challenged by Rav Kahana, and a couple of sugyot ago, also we had a challenge by Rav Kahana that was answered, in that case by Rava. So this also might be answered by Rava. So this here not because the content is similar, but only because the structure of the sugya is similar. Anyway, Rav teaches that if someone makes an opening in a hole, makes a hole in a sheet to be a neck opening on Shabbat, he is liable to bring korban chatat. In other words, let's say you have a sheet and you want to make it into clothing, into a shirt. So then you have to cut a hole in the middle of it so that you could put your head through. This is prohibited because you're creating something new on Shabbat. This was not usable as a utensil, and now you're making it usable as a piece of clothing. And if you do that on purpose, then that would be liable to psikila. If you do it by mistake, without realizing it was prohibited, then that would be liable to a chatat. That's Rav's ruling. Matkif la Rav Kahana v'chi ma ben zel migufat chabit. Rav Kahana asks, wait a second, why should this be liable to a chatat? What would be the difference between this and opening a stopper of a barrel? If you have a barrel of wine and you want to drink from it on Shabbat, so the law is you're allowed to make an opening in the stopper. You can make a hole in it and then pour out the wine. But isn't that also creating a vessel? You had something that was not usable before, and now you're making an opening. Now it's a usable vessel. Why don't you call that also creating something new on Shabbat and should be chayav chatat? But we don't say that. That one is allowed. And so we have an answer. Amar le, ze chibur v'ze eno chibur. There's a difference. In the case of the clothing, it was sealed shut. It's all weaved together. It's one piece of cloth. And so it was connected, and now you're disconnecting it. Whereas in the case of the barrel is made out of clay. That's one vessel. And then there's a separate piece that is a stopper. This was never made out of the same material, it wasn't baked together and closed up. This was a separate item that was stuck in there to keep it nice, closed and sealed. And then you're taking it off or making a hole in it. And so this was a vessel even beforehand. It just had a cover on it. This is actually practical halacha nowadays. If you have a Coke bottle, are you allowed to open the top of the Coke bottle? And some Ashkenazim are machmir on this for this very reason, that by opening the bottle, you're creating a vessel. However, Sephardim say, no, it was a bottle beforehand. It just had a cap on it. So it was already a vessel. You're just opening the vessel, and therefore it is permitted. And so that's the answer that they give to Rav Kahana. There is a difference between the two, and that way we defend the law of Rav. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.